name's Asha Mooney, and we're going to be talking about media ecology in the modern world. In 1948, Pope Pius XII released a document through the Pontifical Council for Communications called Ethics in Communications. This is a vital council to us today, as the media world has become the mainstream form of communication. Rather than fearfully stepping back from this new technology, the Church has prayerfully stepped onto the battlefield. It's easy to choose self-preservation and the comfortable Catholic life. After all, we are not of this world, but we are in this world. And Pope Pius, as well as many other popes, gave us the guidelines for how we are to live as modern Catholics in this media-driven world. On page 1 of this document, Pope Pius wrote, "Great good and great evil come from the use people make of the media of social communication." This refers to all forms of social communication: film, music, news reporting, social media, search filters, and yes, even those ancient things called books. In this podcast, I'm going to talk a little bit about the book called The Population Bomb, as it's had a huge effect on our modern society, and I believe it violates the ethical standards set by the Catholic Church and by morality. The Population Bomb was published in the Times magazine in 1968 by Stanford University professor Paul Erlich. To give you an idea of the voice of his book, I want to share just a few sentences. The battle to feed all of humanity is over. In the 1970s and 1980s, hundreds of millions of people will starve to death in spite of any crash programs embarked upon now. At this late date, nothing can prevent a substantial increase in the world death rate. Programs will only provide a stay of execution unless they are accompanied by determined and successful efforts at population control. If that doesn't leave you feeling a little depressed, I don't know what will. The rest of the book is full of fearful and angry terms, ending in a hopeless doom for humanity. This makes me think of Walter Ong's thoughts on the words that we use to incite fear. On page 135 of The Presence of the Word, he said, "There's an incidence of states of confused excitement with disorganizing amounts of anxiety, fear, and hostility present." Paul Erlich knew that the words he used had power. Power to manipulate people into believing that we were headed to starvation, and the only solution was population control. On the cover of the Times magazine, the question posed to millions of readers is population control or race to oblivion. Only two options, not how to decrease starvation in third world countries, or what can we do to improve the lives of those in poverty, or what are the greatest needs of children across the world. The entire book has a sense of panic. And what do people do when they are in a state of panic? They make rash decisions. And this is exactly what Erlich desired, him along with many other twisted politicians, whose selfish purpose population control serves. On page 9 of the document on communication ethics, Pope Pius wrote, "Even in countries with democratic systems, it is all too common for political leaders to manipulate public opinion through the media instead of fostering informed participation in the political process." Not only does this book leave readers in a state of panic, but it is blatant falsehood. This book became one of the most influential books of the 20th century. Erlich, who's now 85, recently told a news reporter that the book's main contribution was to make population control acceptable as a topic to debate. But the book did far more than that. It had a huge effect on the apocalyptic environmental movement and fueled an anti-population growth crusade that led to human rights abuses around the world. Population alarms swept over the world. The International Planned Parenthood Federation, the Population Council, the World Bank, the United Nations Population Fund, the Hugh Moore-backed Association for Voluntary Sterilization, and other organizations promoted and funded programs to reduce fertility in poor places. Some population control programs pressured women to use officially mandated contraceptives. In Egypt, Tunisia, Pakistan, South Korea, and Taiwan, health workers' salaries were dictated by the number of IUDs they inserted into women. In the Philippines, birth control pills were literally pitched out of helicopters, hovering over remote villages. Millions of people were sterilized, often coercively, sometimes illegally, frequently in unsafe conditions, in Mexico, Bolivia, Peru, Indonesia, and Bangladesh. In the 1970s and 80s, India, led by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi and her son Sanjay, embraced policies that in many states required sterilization for men and women to obtain water, electricity, ration cards, medical care, and pay rises. Teachers could expel students from school if their parents weren't sterilized. More than 8 million men and women were sterilized in 1975 alone. World Bank head Robert McNamara remarked, "At long last, India is moving to effectively address its population problem." For its part, China adopted a one-child policy that led to huge numbers, possibly 100 million, of coerced abortions, often in poor conditions, contributing to infections, sterility, and even death. All of this abuse, for what reason? When looking at UN statistics, I noticed that famine has not been increasing, but has become less. When the population bomb was published, according to the UN Food and Agricultural Organization, something like 1 out of 4 people in the world were hungry. Today, the proportion of hungry is about 1 out of 10. Meanwhile, the world's population has possibly more than doubled. People are surviving because we learned how to do things differently. We've developed and adopted new agricultural techniques, improved seeds, high-intensity fertilizers, drip irrigation. The problem isn't people. It's corrupt governments who are not allowing resources to be effectively managed. As Pope Pius said on page 9 of his document, the media often contribute to the injustices and imbalances that give rise to the suffering they report. Indeed, the population bomb caused much suffering, and it continues to do so. In the presence of the word, on page 22, Walter Ong said, "The terms will be used to mean what in context they mean." Erlich used fearful terms to incite a massive wave of sterilization and contraception, a fear of children. Pope John Paul II knew of this fear, and he addressed it on page 17 of an Evangelium Vitae. Often the media popularize the ethical relativism and utilitarianism that underlie today's culture of death. They participate in the contemporary conspiracy against life by lending credit to that culture which presents resources to contraception, sterilization, abortion, and even euthanasia as a mark of progress and victory of freedom, while depicting as enemies of freedom and progress those positions which are unreservedly pro-life. As we can see from the abusive results from the population bomb, media can be used for vast evil. This is why the ethical guidelines set by the Church are so important. This is why we need good Catholic authors, editors, news reporters, filmmakers, and so on. Rather than leaving the media to the secular world, we must courageously enter it. We must turn the tide of this battlefield to glorify God rather than the spirit of evil. Lastly, as always, Scripture provides a perfect explanation as to how we should approach our media culture. Therefore, putting away falsehood, let everyone speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Let no evil talk come out of your mouths, but only such as is good for edifying, as fits the occasion, that it may impart grace to those who hear. Ephesians 4:25-29.